Now, our next guest is here to discuss something many of us perhaps don't usually think about, the commodity known as potash, a vital agricultural input for fertilisers. In recent years, its supply and availability has been increasingly influenced by agricultural trends, weather, even geopolitics. So, joining us in the studio is Farhad Abasov, chairman of Millennial Potash. He wants to highlight how fragile potash supply chains have become. But perhaps you could just start by just giving us a crash course in why it's so important.
No, absolutely. Great to be here. Look, potash is what they call the king of fertilizers, so, along, of course, with some other key fertilizers that are absolutely critical for agriculture worldwide. And what potash does, I will maybe enumerate in 2-3 aspects of the criticality of potash. One is strengthens the plant cells. The second, then, actually boosts yields for key staple crops such as rice, soybeans, wheat, and so forth. And it also helps plants survive droughts. And as you know, they're becoming more and more often worldwide. So that is why potash is so important. And one other thing about potash is that it's highly concentrated, or geographically highly concentrated in parts of the world that are geopolitically, I would say, hotspots currently.
That's interesting. So does that give certain countries potentially an advantage geopolitically having this concentration?
No, absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't say gives them an advantage. It puts a lot of countries at a disadvantage. So, for example, 40% of the world's potash comes from countries like Russia, Belarus, Israel, and Jordan. So I don't have to go further into the situation. You can appreciate the fragility of the supply chain coming from those countries. Now, the rest of the world imports potash. So if you look at how many countries produce potash, or the bulk of potash, it's basically 3 countries, or 4 or 5 countries, maybe about accounting for 80% of potash, but the rest of the world consumes it, and most of the countries that consume potash, they're actually net importers of potash. So in other words, they have no domestic production of potash.
Mm. We've seen, for example, how wheat has been a key factor in economies, I suppose, around the world, with Russia, with Ukraine, the conflict there, and supplies of wheat affected in places like Egypt or Sudan, for example. Has Russia, to use an example you've given, been using supplies of potash explicitly to push certain geopolitical agendas?
No, we haven't witnessed that, unlike, let's say, oil and gas. We've seen that in Europe. Sure. It's a little bit different. Having said that, a lot of countries that import potash, and I'll just say that all the major agricultural countries, obviously, import potash, the U.S., Western Europe, of course, Brazil, China, India, these are all massive potash importers, and they've been, frankly, tired of being dependent on countries like Russia and Belarus and so forth. So they really look forward to new sources of potash coming from what I would call geopolitically neutral jurisdictions. And that's very important because they're kind of tired of being at their mercy and having these supply chains disrupted all the time because of wars or other geopolitical events.
Yeah, and you're setting up in Gabon. Is that purely a geological choice, or is there more to it than that?
That's a great question. We usually look at projects from 2 perspectives. So one, for sure, from technical angle, meaning that the project has to be strong geologically, it has to have a lot of potash in it, and also potash that's amenable to environmentally friendly methods of extraction. And the second thing is geopolitical situation or jurisdictional risk. And I would say sometimes the latter is even more important than the technical parameters of the project, because you may have a great project in what I would say wrong country, and you would be stuck with that project. In other words, that particular mine will never actually get to production. So in this case, we think the Gabonese project, not only is it great from technical perspective, but also it's in a very stable jurisdiction. The Gabonese government is very supportive of what we're trying to accomplish there.
You say stable, but I mean the president came to power in a coup. That suggests a certain level of uncertainty.
Well, if you look at even how that coup was carried out, this was probably one of the fewest changes of government in Africa that was completely bloodless, meaning there were no shots fired or anything, and people on the streets actually cheered that change. But the most important thing, since you touched on this topic, is that they did hold elections earlier this year in April, and the current president got elected overwhelmingly, I think over 90% of votes. I think, and that, I just don't want to go too much into history, but remember the previous government has been there for 56 years, so it was right time for a change.
The Bongo family.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and this government actually has done a lot of things right so far, meaning that their course, I'm talking about foreign policies here, they've been pretty neutral, meaning they're very close with the European countries. They just signed strategic partnership agreement with the United States government. They're open to investments from Asia as well. And that is important for small companies like ours, of course.
Yeah. The history of projects, foreign investment projects in places like Gabon and elsewhere, is that very often an elite may benefit, the foreign investors may benefit, and the people see little change. Are you going to find a way of circumventing that? Is that possible?
I think it's possible. Look, this is not our first project. We've done quite a few large mining projects, including 2 potash projects in the past. So we know how to approach these things, and specifically, we're positioning our potash project as African potash for African agriculture. So we'll look to make sure that it's not just Gabon, but also most of Africa actually is going to benefit from this project. Now, in terms of actual local population and the country of Gabon, look, this part of Gabon, which is the southern part of the country, is underdeveloped economically. So this project is going to be the driver of economic growth for the next probably 20, 30 years. And we've already engaged a lot of local people in terms of not only employment, but also contractors and also all the infrastructure development. This project will come not only as a potash project, but also with the development of a port, of energy infrastructure, and so forth.
Farhad Abasov, thank you very much indeed, Chairman of Millennial Potash. That is about it for this edition of Newsday on the BBC World Service.
For this week, indeed.
This week, yeah. Have a good weekend, everyone. From Catherine, me and all the team.